All right, good evening, everybody, and welcome to the first ever online speaker series for the Daytona Beach Gator Club on B.Live TV. Really going to enjoy this evening, I think. First go around at this, and normally we're meeting in person and having meetings to talk about Gator football, and we're not able to do that due to the COVID-19 pandemic, but we are going to transition as most everyone and everything are. Um, and we're going to bring some great information tonight. Background a little bit as we get started on the Daytona Beach Gator Club. It is for alumni, family, and friends of the University of Florida. Membership start at $40. You can go to dbgators.com and click join. And essentially, you're joining the University of Florida Alumni Association. And when you join the UFAA, you automatically select which Gator Club you'd like to be involved with, and you're a member. Still doing our watch parties for, interestingly, this year with the pandemic, we're doing home and away games. We're at Hooligans on ISB in Daytona Beach. So if you're looking for some friendly atmosphere to come and watch some orange and blue football, that's the place to be. So with that, it's my pleasure to welcome our guests for this evening. I happened to stumble upon their podcast on Spotify at the beginning of last season, the Gator Nation Football Podcast. Pleasure to welcome James DiVirgilio and Alan Williams. Let me give you some brief background on them as we are getting into this show here. James is a fiduciary investor, co-founder of Chacon Diaz and DiVirgilio Wealth Management, co-creator of the Gator Nation Football Podcast. So you can see as the second ranking there, it's clearly not their full-time thing. They have day jobs, but I think you'll be impressed with the quality of the work that they do. James was a UF 40 under 40 recipient. And he's a featured expert on CBS, Fox, NBC, ABC, SiriusXM, and more. His co-host, Alan Williams, is co-director of a faith-based nonprofit serving as a spiritual resource for students at UF. Also co-creator of the Gator Nation Football Podcast. Graduated from UF in 2002 and is married with 2 daughters. So if you're watching with us on Facebook Live, we'll take questions from the comment section. So feel free to share your questions for James and Alan, and we'll kind of get it kicked off. Gentlemen, I want to ask you about the podcast. How did it get started? And then, having read your backgrounds now, why did it get started? Because clearly you don't need additional things to do.
I'll let Alan take that one because it was his idea, so it's his story to tell.
Sure. So I was looking for a Gator football podcast to start the season, just kind of get myself ramped up. Here's some stuff. I've been listening to a lot of podcasts, and I started looking, and there wasn't really one out there that was doing what I wanted it to do. So a lot of recruiting-based ones. It's funny to think about now because there's lots of more podcast content out there, but I was like, well, what if I just made one? And immediately I thought of James, my longtime friend, and something my wife said is that she liked sitting in between me and James at the football games because she learned so much by hearing us talk across her to one another. And so immediately I thought, oh, let's go talk to James. And I went over to his house and said, hey, what if we start this podcast? And he said, immediately, we're going to do it. We knew nothing about podcasting when he said yes, and so we started to learn. And here we are 5, 6 years later.
Yeah, what is it? Yeah, 5 years now. 5 years, 5th season. We really had no idea. We just started Google searching stuff, and I thought it can't be that hard to do a podcast. And I was right and wrong. We had our first guest that season. We brought in a guest. We just started calling athletic departments and said, can we get your head coach, or can we get your play-by-play announcer? And so we wind up with our first guest, and I'm Googling how do I run these different microphone streams through my laptop, and how do I call someone? And thankfully, Google's a tremendous resource. So really, we started the podcast with about $200 total to buy a microphone, a pop filter, and that was it. And that's all we've really spent on the podcast since then. We've just gotten better and better at engineering the sound and a bunch of other stuff. So it's been a fun journey.
Well, congratulations to you both, because the quality is outstanding, both from an informational standpoint, but as well as a production value standpoint. And people underestimate that. It's not easy to make electronic broadcasts sound and look good. So kudos to you guys for doing that. So if I recall from listening, your first season was 2015. So it was, correct me if I'm wrong, that was the Will Greer a shortened season. Yes.
That was it. I still remember the moment of walking. It was at Alan's house, which we had nicknamed Studio B. And A and C, we changed it all throughout the year kind of for fun. And I remember walking in faithfully on that day, that Monday, and just this huge wave of depression settling in. And like, what are we going to do? We're calling our friends who are doctors. Like, what is this thing that he took? But yeah, that was our first year. And that was a significant year from a coverage standpoint. There were so many things to talk about.
Yeah, you definitely weren't having to scramble for content in a year like that. But I think you think about the butterfly effect on what might have been had he stayed, gone through. We might still be in the Jim McElwain era, which I think we would all agree is we're in a better spot now, and what might have been.
For sure, yeah, we thought about that a lot. I mean, would you kind of little hypotheticals that you run? Would you take? I've taken like 3 more years of Will Greer and all that would have done, and still have Jim McElwain, or rather be where we are right now. It's a fun little counterfactual there.
Yeah, my first experience at a Florida Georgia game was that the season that McElwain got fired. After that game, it was 42-7 thrashing or something like that. And if the atmosphere wasn't what Florida Georgia is, I would have just been miserable. It was a good experience, even when you lose that bad, but that was awful. So, well, fortunately, we're not in the Jim McElwain era any longer. We are smack dab in the middle of the Dan Mullen era. So let's talk about this 2020 football team. And one of the things that, as I started to listen to the podcast and started hearing all of the stuff I was telling our board and all of my fellow Gator fans, I'm like, listen, you got to check this out. It's the best analysis content that I've come across. And the thing that really, I think, did that for me was you guys being the very first who were on Kyle Trask as an elite quarterback. I think it was the second game that he played after the Kentucky game where he comes in for Franks at the end and saves the day. That next game, when you guys were breaking that down, you were like, we see things that this is going to be different. It's a great feel good story, and I am convinced ultimately he'll have a movie made at some point, because the idea that somebody doesn't play from middle school to college and then steps in and leads a top program is just remarkable. But you guys were on that when the rest of the national broadcasters were kind of like, well, this is a feel-good story. He's succeeding because people don't have film on him yet and all of that kind of stuff. And you said, no, these things were, you called them repeatable skills that you saw him displaying. What were the things that stood out to you for him that you knew this guy has something that not everybody else has in their repertoire?
Yeah, the technical skills for quarterbacking. I remember actually making that comment on that podcast. I think it was after the Tennessee game where we said, "Hey, these skills on film, they're technical, they're repeatable. This is not a fluke." And those skills tend to be first. What does the quarterback look at as soon as they catch the ball in their hands? Where do their eyes go? What do their feet do? How are they processing the information on the field? And we had come from a guy in Felipe Franks who was a very slow processor. In fact, at times he wouldn't ever even come off of his first read, to a guy in Trask who in the Kentucky game had already displayed that he was able to get 2 or 3 reads deep. In Tennessee, he had actually read the entire field on multiple occasions, and that was remarkable for a guy who had never even started a football game. The last thing you'd expect is for someone to read out the entire field like that. And then on top of that, he was accurate. So you had these things for a quarterback, when it comes to processing speed, footwork, and accuracy. He had all 3 of them. And at that point in time, you kind of know if you're on a top 25 team and you have those 3 skills, you should be able to do that week in and week out. And obviously that was something that was true. And then going back to Will Greer, I think our podcast has been interesting. I was the most frustrated with the Treon Harris, Will Greer scenario. We had seen Will Greer play that one game as well, and we said the same exact thing that we said about Trask, and Treon Harris was the quarterback, right? So this year it's been nice, obviously, and last year to watch a guy like Trask grow, develop, mature, because as you mentioned, we didn't get that chance with Will Greer. We did not get to watch that as Florida fans. We're seeing it with Trask and all the skills he displayed early on. He's continued to display and then some, which was not a surprise to me, based upon what he did, obviously, on film, but is a remarkable story. It's hard to find a precedent for what he has been able to do.
So what's his ceiling? do you think? I mean, this is a guy who I can't imagine he is feeling anything but, like, geez, I've only had what a dozen or 15 games that he started over the course of his football career at this point. Where do you, how far does he go? How high can he go in the draft? What do you think he projects as a professional quarterback?
Well, I mean, you'll find a difference of opinion across a lot of NFL evaluators. Certainly, like it only takes one team to fall in love with the guy, as the saying goes. But it's hard for me to see him falling past a day 2 pick, which would be round 2 or 3. That feels like the floor. And if some team likes him in the first round, now again, he's going to get all the normal things that would happen, like the combine kind of throw in where they get to see him. That could move him up or down depending on what they see there. I think he probably lacks some of just the raw, like physical traits in terms of speed and like the huge arm that makes people wow from an NFL perspective. But I don't really doubt that he can be a successful NFL quarterback. He does the things that you would want to lead your team to victory. So he's not going to hurt you, and he's going to put you in the right place. He's going to get the ball to the right people, and you can win a lot of games with that. Again, I think it remains to be seen because we have so little data on him, like what he could do at the highest level. But I don't see his ceiling yet. I think he can continue to get better.
Yeah, I think as far as me evaluating him, looking around, look at a guy like Joe Burrow. I think Trask and Burrow are similar. Burrow quicker, obviously footwork wise, also a stronger arm than Kyle Trask has, but not by leaps and bounds. And if you look at what Burrow's doing in the NFL this year, it's remarkable. He's on pace for one of the greatest starts in the history of the NFL for a quarterback. And a lot of that does have to do with the changing of the guard in football in general, how offenses are run, how defenses have not caught up yet, and they will eventually. They have not yet. But I think if you're looking at that kind of quarterback, which more NFL teams now are looking at, Trask is that kind of guy. Super accurate, very high processor, very, very comfortable throwing the ball into tight, especially man-to-man windows. The question for him at the next level, I think that scouts are going to ask is how would he handle having to fit balls into tight windows if it's not man-to-man? And one thing college teams don't really make you do is throw the ball into a zone in a narrow window right on time. Trask's timing is perfect, but is he going to drive downhill? He, because of Florida's offensive line, has to throw a lot of passes off of his back foot or with his feet square to the field, which those are phenomenal passes given where his feet are. So I think for him, if he's not a first round pick, I would be surprised. And right now he's Alan said he's a second day pick consensus. I would be surprised if he's not a first round pick, come 2021 draft.
Very interesting. I agree with you. The things that some of the throws that I've seen him make, and admittedly, I did not play organized football. I just have been a fan for a really long time, and you can compare guys and arm strength and all of that kind of stuff. The first touchdown in the A&M game to Grimes, on that right side, he had to throw that ball so early. Like when I look back at the replay, and I'm like, he has no idea. He's trusting his receiver that his receiver is going to get enough separation and make a catch on that first touchdown. But I don't think. I mean, like Felipe Franks never makes that throw because he can't wait until he's open. Trask threw that ball seconds before Grimes was open, and that was just remarkable to me.
Yeah, that throw was incredible, and Jordan Rogers highlighted that throw and kind of used it. Like we've used it on our podcast about the arm strength debate. It's like Kyle Trask has an above average arm. He has plenty of arm strength. Because he's so accurate, he throws on time a lot. He'll feather the ball more than other guys will. But yeah, that was a 40-yard throw, far hash. That's an NFL level throw, and he put it in a little box. And that's again what Trask does. I've got an offensive breakdown film coming out from the A&M game, which will probably release either tonight or tomorrow. And it shows several of those throws, even on some of his bad throws. He puts the ball in a spot that's absolutely perfect. And that's what the NFL wants to see above all. The NFL has a history of guys with really strong arms. Kyle Bowler comes to mind. Kyle Bowler played for the Ravens. He could throw a ball through the uprights from his knee from the 50-yard line. Could never cut it in the NFL. Just didn't have the accuracy. And on the flip side, I'm a Dolphins fan. You had Chad Pennington, who was a noodle arm after his shoulder surgery and really couldn't put any velocity on the ball and still played for years in the league. So again, Trask above average arm, incredibly high processor, throws the ball on time almost always, which is a really important NFL skill. So I think a first round pick is what he's going to wind up getting. I think right now that people are still skeptical in the scouting world. They kind of expect eventually some team's going to find a way to stop him, or we're going to see him kind of come back down to earth. But I don't think that's going to happen.
Yeah, well, and to Alan's point, there's such a limited amount of data on him. It really is difficult. So let's talk about this team. It seems like for a decade we were, as Gator fans, saying we've got a lights out defense. If we just had an offense that could score another 10 points, we'd be maybe multiple rings, at least competitive with the top teams at the time, the Alabamas, the Clemsons, and those kinds of folks. In the most 2020 of circumstances, this year, it's like they went in the locker room and changed uniforms. Now we've got an offense that can light up the scoreboard, and we've got a defense that can't stop. They're running through us like it's a wet paper bag. What, in your opinion, what gives with that? Like, why is it such a night and day flip, seemingly from one season to the next?
It's hard to understand, honestly. It's quite perplexing. I mean, it is a funny thing. You feel like you're waiting so long for something, you get it, and then like you said, the inverse happens. I mean, James did a fantastic job in one of his videos of breaking down all the ways that we're failing, but it's still inexplicable to me why this defense would turn like from a very competent to sometimes excellent unit to just a dumpster fire. I think there's a lot of narratives you could cut out there, whether it's COVID, whether it's just some of the things they're trying to do with playing guys in like positionless kind of positions, to say a weird phrase. But I don't think there's not a silver bullet there. What this is the reason why. You could say, well, here's the ways that they're failing, but why are they failing is kind of mind-numbing.
Yeah, I think for me, and this is not a surprise to anyone who listens to the podcast, that it's directly attributable to coaching. You go back in the past 10 years and you look at Florida's coaching staffs, we have had some really good defensive coordinators. Lots of guys that either are head coaches now or, Dan Quinn almost won a Super Bowl, right? You start to look at all these guys we had. For every Randy Shannon, you had a superstar coordinator. And this is the first time, in my opinion, that we've had a multiple year coordinator that is anything but a superstar, has always had a very questionable track record. And I think now has run into a football game that is vastly different than what he once coordinated for most of his life. And on film, he's just inadequately prepared. We talked a lot last year in the podcast about how the Gator defense was sort of window dressing. It did really well against vastly inferior quarterbacks and opponents. But whenever we faced, and I mean whenever we faced a quarterback that knew what he was doing, we would get shredded. And there's plenty of evidence to indicate that from year one with Grantham. So a lot of those defensive rankings, they were a mirage. They were a little bit fake, a little bit fraudulent. And it just so happens this season, we have actually faced quarterbacks, 3 straight quarterbacks that all are capable. And Kellen Mond is not very good, but he's infinitely more capable than what Grantham was able to face in previous years. And so to your point, it's so frustrating to think that if we just had an average defense, we're contending for a title this year. And in previous years, if we just had an average offense, we're contending. And we just can't seem to put things together. One of Alan's friends coined this phrase we say on the pod all the time. We just can't have nice things, apparently. It's just not something we can have. And it's like a Venn diagram. It's nice things and things we can have, and they don't overlap.
Yeah, well, and being an astute listener of the podcast, Alan, when you were talking about positionless position players, I know exactly what you're talking about. We have like jacks of all trades, masters of none. Yes. It seems like a lot of flexible kinds of skill sets, but no specialists in any one era. So while we're chatting, if you're watching with us on Facebook Live, I encourage you to submit questions. If you comment on the feed, we'll see the questions in our broadcast and be able to answer those for you. I can assure you a wealth of knowledge, at least on 2/3 of the folks you're seeing on your screen right now. So shoot those questions over. We want to make this entertaining and want to ask the questions that you guys want to know about our beloved orange and blue clad football team. So while we're waiting, hopefully for a few questions to come in, I want to ask one. After the A&M game, I had a debate with a former sports broadcasting colleague of mine who posted something that I just didn't make sense to me in his analysis of the game. And he's been in broadcasting for probably going on 30 years. I played collegiate level baseball, so he understands competition at a high level and the skill sets and all the things that go into that. And in the Facebook post that he made was right after the Texas A&M loss. He says, "Gosh, I guess nobody's really bragging on Nick Savage right now?" ? And I was like, what does that have to do with anything? Is that it's called Third and Grantham, not Third and Savage. But being an astute podcast listener for the Gator Nation Football Podcast, so thank you, gentlemen, for my my arsenal I was able to unleash in my debate back and forth with him. I was like, this has got I mean, he basically, his premise was we got pushed up and down the field by Texas A&M and they did whatever we want. And I'm like, it's really, I think, much more about the scheme that we were running. If you've got 5 offensive linemen blocking 3 to 4 defensive linemen, those are numbers you're going to win. And I can't for a minute believe that we've gone from all these years of Nick Savage and having really strong athletic talent to now we're getting pushed around the field by Texas A&M. I mean, Jimbo Fisher's a good coach, but he's not a miracle worker. It's not like all of a sudden they're taking anything. So I argued with him that it was scheme. He kept arguing strength and conditioning. So help me settle that debate a little further, if you don't mind.
Well, it would be a strange thing to lay at Nick Savage's feet, anyway, considering the players were not around over the summer. So even if they were deficient strength-wise, I don't know that you would blame Nick Savage. I'm sure maybe a little bit there. But I think it's true that the Gators don't have anybody up front who's just a world beater, would wreck people by themselves and things like a Nick Fairley of Auburn or Ndamukong Suh, where you just change the game just from his defensive tackle position. But I think you're very right. We are playing very light up front. So even not a man down, we're not going to be able to withstand a real road grading attack. But mostly it's because we're either in the wrong scheme or not executing the scheme, even if we were close to being in the right scheme. So I haven't seen it as a pure power strength. I don't think the guys up front are those type of players necessarily, but I don't think that's the main reason, certainly.
Yeah, and obviously Nick Savage doesn't recruit players. I mean, Nick Savage can take an undersized guy and make him as strong as he can possibly make him, but he's not recruiting. So if you give Nick Savage Gervin Dexter, he's going to look like a monster, which, by the way, he does. If you give him an undersized guy, he's going to look like the biggest version of an undersized guy. But hopefully, the podcast film breakdown did a lot to dispel those conversations. And in fact, it's really fun to sit where we're sitting now. Alan and I used to go back and forth. I used to be really frustrated because the kind of common journalism opinion was always very unsophisticated, right? It was that narrative. You got pushed around. You didn't try hard enough. We got bullied. Well, that could have been true, or it could not be true. And I think the film study shows that our defensive line was routinely going against the wrong side of the numbers. And that was a schematic decision that we made. You cannot expect any defensive line to win those battles. And throughout the game, the very few times that it was an equal match, we actually won that battle up front. So I think that's not the correct thought, but that's something that I think I derive the most joy from on the pod is it's amazing to me now to think of, we have maybe 10,000 listeners, how many people write to us each week that now are getting what I hope is more of a truthful look at what's going on, which makes us Gator fans more educated, more in tune to what's happening. We have better conversations. We can discuss at a higher level what may happen or what should happen. And we hope that betters everyone. And to put a bow on that, when we started the podcast, I told Alan, hey, I don't know if anybody has an appetite for the analytical stuff that we're going to bring or that I want to bring. And maybe I shouldn't even do it. So originally I was kind of worried to talk about like Copa One and talk about anything. We just said, forget it. Let's just do it and see what happens. So it warms my heart that people are thoroughly enjoying hour-long film breakdowns. It's almost unbelievable, but I think it shows the kind of fans that the nation has.
Yeah, I would concur with that and offer you kudos there as well. Before you guys came on tonight, I was talking with Tom Picorni, our webmaster, and I said, one of the things that I appreciate about the podcast is that for the non-coaching guru football fan, the weekend fan like I am, where I like to see a good game and I know enough about the game to be dangerous, but I couldn't critique anybody by any stretch of the imagination. When you guys go into explaining something that is more technical about the game, you do it in a way that is not only educational and easy to understand, but it's non-insulting either. It's not like, oh, okay, for you hockey pucks who have never been on the gridiron, this is what the smart people in the room are seeing. I kudos on how to bring the average fan, so to speak, into a more educated level of conversation. So thank you much for that. I want to ask you a question while we're talking about the defensive side of the ball from our Daytona Beach Gator Club president, Catherine Coleman. She wants to know, and I think many of us do, what is going on with Marco Wilson? Talking about a guy who the joke, and I can't remember if it was something I heard on the podcast or a conversation with another friend, but I heard somebody say recently that at the Texas A&M game, he played himself down at least 2 rounds in the draft. And what's happened? This is a guy who was going to be like the latest in the string of our DBU candidates, and now it's all of a sudden like it's like he doesn't know what he's doing out there sometimes. What do you guys see? What do you think is happening with him?
It's really unfortunate because this guy who you watched him play as a freshman, I think we all thought this guy's going to be a future star, NFL first round pick, or at least a long time starter in the NFL. And I think currently we're seeing the limits of what Marco is capable of. I think in part because the staff is asking him to do too many things and too many things that he's not comfortable with. But that doesn't go far enough to explain some of the issues he's having in just pure coverage, which, that's something he should be able to do regardless. But I don't know if there's a health thing, a confidence thing, but there's clearly something up with him that he can't do some of the basic things that he used to do.
Yeah, it's hard. This is a good question. On film, they had to play Marco last year. They didn't have to. I think we had other alternatives. Listen to the podcast. We begged for them, but they played him at nickel, what we call the star, and that's not a good position for Marco Wilson. It never was. It's not the way that his body moves, and that's okay. There's plenty of NFL cornerbacks that are many-year starters that would not be able to play the slot corner or the nickelback position. It's just a different position. And I think not only did that wreck his confidence, I think it's also messed with his technique. But I think more importantly, I have a lot of questions about our cornerback technique in general. If you look at Marco Wilson, it doesn't look like his top end speed is not there, but everything he does is very slow. It's not playing confident. It doesn't seem to be understanding what's happening. And we illustrated that on that breakdown as well. There's some plays where it's just everything is late to react, late to move here, late to do this. So right now, I mean, if you're Marco Wilson, your draft stock is not gone because what you do in the combine means a lot to the NFL. But film-wise, it's a disaster to the point to where I think he's earned himself a spot on the bench, and then see if you can't get him back, see if he can't come back off the bench and earn some playing time. But on film against that A&M game, he was a major reason why we couldn't stop anyone. Now, scheme wasn't helping anything, but individually, he really struggled. And none of us will know why. It's possible that injury is limiting him more than we know, right? It's very possible. I mean, he's definitely not, I can tell you definitively, he's not the same player on film now that he was as a freshman. He does not have the same burst. He doesn't stay on top of the routes as well. So an injury could certainly be something to blame, but we can't say that definitively. Just know there's been a huge drop off on what he's putting out there on film.
Yeah, for me, the best example of that was the long touchdown over the middle I'm blanking on A&M's receiver who came out of nowhere for 9 catches and just crushed us. But when that ball's coming down and the camera gave a really good angle on the live broadcast, I'm looking at that, I'm going, that's at worst a pass breakup. At best, he's coming down with this and it's a touchback and we're taking the ball at the 20. And then when it falls in for an A&M touchdown, I was like, how did that even happen? I mean, to me, that was like in a nutshell, like, where he's gone. As a freshman, there's no way that guy catches that ball.
Yeah, that's there's obviously lots of skills to being a corner. One of them is how well you play the ball in the air. And he was beat by 4 or 5 yards on that play. And I think sometimes as a corner, you're just doing all you can to get back into play. Mond underthrows the ball and gets a chance to make a play and just misses it. But confidence is huge in sports. Momentum is huge in sports. And when you got a guy who's not playing with confidence, is not playing with swagger, is not playing fast, you tend to have yourself be on the wrong end of those kind of encounters.
Well, let's get off something this. I'm like starting to get depressed a little bit talking about our defense. Let's talk about something that's a lot more fun. There, we've got the other Kyle, and it's kind of hard to even believe you would say this about a guy that's as talented as he is. But the other Kyle on offense, Kyle Pitts. Talk about an incredible talent. He strikes me as a once in a generation level of talent and can make any quarterback look really good. And when you pair him with a talent like Kyle Trask, it's just like magic to watch. Why is he so good? What are the skill sets he's bringing to the table that make him a matchup nightmare for whoever is guarding him?
I think he's going to be interesting. It's funny. He is extremely talented, and obviously he's got the body to be an NFL tight end. His blocking improved tremendously. They're probably going to put about 10 pounds on him. That's all he needs to be an NFL tight end. The NFL and college, though, is very different. So I want to hold off and see what happens to Kyle Pitts when he's being covered by guys who are capable of covering him, which in the NFL, they'll do that. What makes Travis Kelce, which makes, Waller now at Las Vegas, right? Who he is it doesn't matter who you put on those guys. They'll beat you. And I think that people think Pitts can be that guy. He's that guy in college by far. But a lot of the magic of Pitts is Kyle Trask. Remember that Kyle Pitts was a nobody with Felipe Franks at quarterback. And he was still Kyle Pitts. Because Kyle Pitts is open. But a lot of the times when you get a guy like Trask, all a guy like Kyle Pitts needs is a little leverage, which is, again, what NFL tight ends do. And I think that's why people are so excited about his game at the next level. He runs his routes really well. He always creates a throwable window for the quarterback. And again, his blocking, he's taking a big step forward. So he is a phenomenal modern tight end. I think that the NFL is going to be very excited about him. But with all these tight ends in the NFL now, there's so many more guys that are uber talented. It will be interesting to see what is his ceiling. Is he a once in a generation guy? Or in the NFL, is he a plus tight end? I don't know. I think that's actually hard to project with him. I'm not pouring water on him. But in college, he's a sensation, especially on this team and this offense.
Yeah, he's a once in a generation type guy for us, certainly. There's a phrase that gets used in the NFL or scouting circles called catch radius, which just means like if you draw a circle like around you, where are you able to catch the ball? And his catch radius is huge, from his length to his jumping ability, his timing of the ball. And he has improved his hands as well. I mean, he had a few drops last year, and I don't think we've seen him drop one yet. Maybe I'm misremembering one, but that's amazing. Where you can put that ball just about anywhere, and he's going to comfortably come down with it. You can't throw it too low or too high, almost, for him.
Yeah, well, the catch he made in the A&M game, kind of tip drilled it to himself a little bit, and continued that to be a positive play was just amazing. So we've had an unfortunate couple of off weeks here with the COVID outbreak on the team. That sometimes you hear people talking in football schedule about, boy, what a great time for a bye week. Maybe you're dinged up, you need to get healthy, those kinds of things. After seeing that defensive performance at Kyle Field, I couldn't agree. What a better time for a bye week. What do you think the impact of these 2 weeks off is going to be? I know in the pod you were talking about the inability to really do much because you've got guys that are sick and they're quarantined and that kind of stuff. But what do you see on the other side of this in terms of potential improvement on the defense? What is there room for optimism?
Well, I think there's certainly room for hope. Again, I know I'm a little more optimistic than James is maybe on this particular situation. But as someone who leads other people, if I'm Dan Mullen, I certainly put way more time into looking at what my defensive unit is doing. I'm way more hands-on. Again, he's talked about looking at the schemes, looking at the players, looking at the positions. So he said that he's going to do that. what that results in, I don't know. Again, I don't think you can make wholesale changes because, as you said, you don't have the practice time to implement them, but you can stop doing things you're doing bad and start highlighting things you're doing better, and you can take people out who are underperforming and just try something new, and you have a chance to really look at that and do a big evaluation. Because often in the heat of the battle, you don't have time to look and say, how are we doing on all these things? Because there's not enough time. But they have the time certainly right now. And the conclusions that they come away with, I'm hopeful that are going to be, pretty severe, like that we need to make big changes. And if not, it's going to be pretty disappointing. Again, the X factor is certainly like how much could they actually implement without a lot of practice time. But I would be disappointed if there were no changes.
Yeah, as I said in the podcast, and I'll just be brief with this one, since I covered it probably too much in length on the pod, but I don't expect a lot of changes, but that's only because so much of my history as an investor, as an analyst, is to figure out what the humans are doing. And I think Grantham has a very strong and consistent track record of doing what he does, and that's not making changes that I want him to make. And that there's been 2.5 years of that, so I don't expect that to change. I think if anything, it'll be real small. One guy will go here, or someone else will go there. But I think that the bigger answer to the question is this is not a real bye week. This is bad. This is really bad, right? No one can practice. No official activities can happen. So certainly the players, if Alan and I are safeties, we can go out in the field and on our own and try to get work in, but the coaches cannot be there with us. So you're talking about 2 weeks where you can't go in the weight room. You can't do anything related to catching passes officially with coaches. You can watch film, but again, college players, that's not something they're typically strong at anyway. So I don't know what this is going to look like, but as it stands right now here in Gainesville, where we are, it doesn't look like football is going to even resume until the 25th. And that might even be hopeful, given what I'm hearing the football team is dealing with. So you're talking about 14 days of no football of any kind at all, right? I can't see that being a good thing unless, like we mentioned on the podcast, we had a new defensive coordinator and somebody that was going to really install some new defensive concepts, and we were going to spend those 4 days practicing something new. I don't think it's going to happen. This does not seem good. Thankfully for us, we're playing a Missouri team that we should be able to beat before we obviously then go play Georgia.
Yeah. That the concern for me, and you touched on this in the pod a little bit this week, was we've got no room for error now in the schedule either. We're booked solid from now through what hopefully is a game on December 19th, and that's assuming that nobody else has any issues within their programs, much less what we're talking about with our own guys. So cool. So I think we've got about 20 minutes left. Keep questions coming in the Facebook Live feed. Get us some comments and questions for James and for Alan. They're very graciously spending an hour of precious time. If you were on early, you heard their backgrounds. They've got a lot of stuff going on in addition to the podcast, and that's growing leaps and bounds with film breakdowns on YouTube and Twitter and all of these things. So I encourage you to follow them on all of those platforms, whether it's social media or you're finding the podcast on Spotify or whatever channel platforms you're getting that on. It's well worth your time. Makes for a much easier commute for me in the mornings. Nova Road in Daytona Beach is not nearly as maddening when I'm distracted by the good conversation versus the sometimes less than skilled drivers on the road. So I encourage you to check that stuff out. So that I don't want this to feel like work for you guys where you're doing all the same stuff you always do in the week on the podcast. So let's get into some kind of, I think, more fun Gator football related stuff. Tell me, I'd like to hear from each of you, what was your first experience as a Gator?
Yeah, I mean, I would say, I grew up around a lot of Florida fans and would have called myself a Florida fan. But my first time in the swamp was actually against Georgia during the reconstruction of the Jacksonville Stadium, whatever we're calling it now, Everbank Field or whatever it was back then, in a monsoon with some friends of mine. And I don't think I ever really recovered from watching that game. So it was a fantastic atmosphere, even in a downpour. And so I've been to started going to a few more Florida Georgia games. And of course, coming to UF and being in the swamp for a big game, especially night games, transformative. I think once you get a taste of that, you never really leaves you.
Yeah, my story is different, but entertaining. So I grew up in Miami. I grew up about 10 minutes away from my campus, and I was a huge Hurricane fan. I was a baseball player, went to all the baseball games, went to all the football games. That's the 80s, where the Hurricanes were awesome. And I just figured I'm going to go to Miami. And my dad, being the good banker dad that he was, when I'm 12, sat me down and said, "Hey, you're not going to go to Miami because it's a private school and there's no reason to go there for undergrad. You can go there for grad school if you want." I'm like, what? I'm 12. Like, I'm not thinking about that. So his colleagues at work, one was a Gator, one was a Florida State fan, were like sort of racing to get me to one of those games. And the Florida fan first got me to go to one. I went to the Florida LSU game in the 90s. LSU wasn't good. The Gators won by 1,000,000 points. It was fun, but I was not a Gator. I just thought it was cool. I was a Hurricane. And in fact, the only school I applied to was UF because it was the obvious choice to stay in state. And I really still was not like a Gator fan. I mean, Miami wasn't good anymore, but I was not a Gator fan. I was just neutral. And I came to school and obviously got caught up in the fever. But I would say when it really crested for me significantly, and I'll never forget this, is I went down to Coral Gables. I watched the Florida-Miami game. Brock Berlin, who came into school at the same time I did, was playing for Miami because he had transferred out. And we blew a massive, 3-touchdown lead in the second half. And they come back to win at the end. And Gator chomps all the student section where I'm sitting. Gator chomps, throat slashes the student section. And that was it for me. From that point in time on, I was like a huge Gator fan. I mean, I went to all the Gator games. I was passionately watching all of them. But that was it. Like, that cemented it for me. There was no doubt that obviously I was all in, and I had no more love for my former school. That kind of just tainted it. But yeah, I was a late bloomer, I guess, so to speak. But now, of course, my love for the Gators, it's as high as it could possibly be. And now I just see that Miami Hurricane uniform. I still see the U sometimes, and it brings back like childhood memories. But there's no affinity in that regard.
He's been converted.
I am a convert.
Very good. Well, hey, that if you're going to be born again, that's a good way to do it too. So, very cool. Okay, so who is or was your favorite Gator? At first, I will limit it to football.
So for me, my formative years in the 90s, there's only one guy really, that's Danny Werfel. Admired him tremendously as both a person and as a player, and watching his Gator career and the success he had, not just his accomplishments, but how he played the game, and him bringing the Gators to the top. I mean, there could be no other guy for me. I mean, I know everybody loves Tim Tebow. I love Tim Tebow, but for me, it starts and stops with Danny Werfel.
Yeah, that makes sense. I think if anyone's a Gator fan at that point in time, it had to be Danny Werfel. So in the mid-'90s, I was still a Hurricane fan. They're on probation. Danny Werfel was a guy slinging touchdowns for the Gators. I remember Jock West Green and Riedel Anthony obviously really well for those championship moments. But I think for me, I was at school at a weird time, right? Spurrier's there, and then it's Zook, and then I'm in grad school, and then in comes Urban. But the most fun player that I ever watched, as far as just pure joy and pageantry for the game, was definitely Tim Tebow. And despite the fact that I'm obviously a little older than Tim, it was just it was so fun Chris League's freshman year to have Tim come in on 3rd down and 1 and just run someone over. I don't think I'd ever experienced satisfaction like that watching a quarterback. And for me, that's why. And it's funny because I think on the pod, Denomius, I really prefer like a throwing accurate cerebral quarterback. But there was something about Tim that for the college game was just so right and so perfect. And I think for Gator fans, we might never know what it would have been like to have Tim on a different team because we got to have him. But there was something really unique and special about that era and that time about having a guy that played the game like that. That you may never see another guy like that. He was kind of Mr. College Football, but that was really cool.
Yeah, My argument for Tebow is people disparage him because he was not a successful professional football player. But I would say this is a guy who he changed the game. He changed the way people approached to try and stop him. And for all of the bashing of his accuracy passing the football, maybe at the professional level, go back and watch some of those college games. He dropped some nice passes in on people that just you shouldn't be able to do that and run somebody over like you're outweighing them by 200 pounds. It just you shouldn't be able to do both of those things. Okay, so favorite Gator now in any sport is are Warfel and Tebow your top guys overall, or are there other Gators from other teams who might step into the spotlight and make a run for that top spot for you guys?
That Tim's not my favorite. My favorite of all is Joe Noah. I mean, that was the most fun I've ever had. I'm just smiling thinking about it. That was the most fun I've ever had as a sports fan. Being in the O-Dome, watching him in person do the stuff he did. That team obviously was amazing, but there was something just, again, like Tim, just so much fun about the way that Joe Noah played college basketball, the passion he had for being a Gator, how he repped the brand. He's probably my favorite Gator of all time. And I don't know that actually I knew the answer to these questions until you asked me right now, because no one has ever asked me. But as I thought about it, that's mine. I don't know what Alan's going to say. I'm curious.
I mean, it would definitely have to be Danny. I loved, it's a little controversial, I love those Walsh, Roberson, David Lee teams.
Really? That's
they did
interesting.
not.
That is very interesting.
They did not achieve the kind of success, and of course, I mean, I think probably the most, like maybe my favorite Gator sports moment was that first basketball title. So those statements are in a little conflict, but I loved watching David Lee play. I love the style of play of those teams. They didn't get there, but I just had so many great memories of watching them in the O-Dome, and it was just a great moment as a fan. I just enjoyed them so much. Again, they were certainly completely frustrating at times, but you just kind of sandwich those two things. I mean, a lot of those wounds are healed by the fact that we won 2 titles right after that. So you don't look back with as much frustration, certainly.
Winning cures a lot of ills. That is for certain. Yeah, I would agree. The 04s, those 06 and 07 basketball title teams were among my favorite to watch. I have both championship games on DVD, and I'll throw them in and watch them every now and then. Particularly in the last couple of years when we get maddeningly, frustratingly mediocre at times. And they're just I don't know that I could even pick a favorite player from just that team. I mean, watching Lee Humphrey pull up from like 60 feet away and put a dagger in the other team's heart was just awesome. And it like didn't even come close to touching the rim. Corey Brewer, he's like the Kyle Pitts in basketball. Matchup for anybody, almost impossible. That was just such a fun team to watch. Okay, so what is the loudest that you've ever heard the Swamp? And I want to give you a couple of caveats on this one as well. Loudest on one play, and then loudest from start to finish for an entire game.
So this is maybe one of my top 5 worst moments in the Swamp, but I believe it's the 04 FSU game, 03, Swindle in the Swamp.
Oh, man.
I've erased that, but that 4th down where we are most likely, it looks like we're going to win the game after the refs have just put on the worst display of officiating in human history, and we still are going to win the game. On that 4th down, it was just deafening. So there's a couple of moments, but I remember that being almost like blackout loud. You couldn't hear because it was so.
Yeah, a lot of people say the cock block, the South Carolina game, was the loudest they have heard, and that certainly was loud. That was one play loud. That game itself was not consistently loud. For me, though, and this is probably just the impact that I had, and I didn't mention this when you asked me kind of my favorite, but the most impactful game on me in my life as a Gator, really, although I didn't cement it at the time, was in 1999. I came up to watch. My friend was at school here. I was a senior in high school. I came to watch Florida, Tennessee, and Florida stopped Tennessee. It was like 4th and 2. Tennessee's top 10 at that point in time. Florida's top, 10 at that point in time. But that atmosphere was amazing. and everyone's pouring onto the street afterwards. And I'm a senior in high school. This is the coolest thing I've ever experienced. But that game was consistently loud. It was a close game the entire time. That was just riotous. And I'm sure I'm biased. I didn't have what you have now. You know, the older you get, you experience so many loud moments that they all sort of become less impressive. Like, it's hard to appreciate them as much. It's just a symptom of being experienced, I guess. But that one sticks out for me in my mind. I really remember that moment and that game entirely just being like mayhem. And then also the Peter Warwick Florida State game that Florida hosted college game day at. Florida lost, but Florida picked off the ball in the first or second quarter and ran it back for like a 30-ish yard pick six. And that place was losing its mind. It was unreal how loud it was during that interception. So I think that interception and the cock block were the two that I remember the most for like moments of noise.
So it's interesting, James, that you would bring up that 93 Florida State game, because for me, that's the loudest individual play that I've heard, but it was a different play later in that game. We were down, I don't know, what was it, 27-7 or something like that. And, you know, this is Ward winning the Heisman at quarterback and Warwick Dunn and, you know, those guys. And we finally, we had finally stopped Warwick from, you know, a kickoff return of anything less than 50 yards, which was remarkable. And then we score two times, make it 27-21. And we were just talking about this with some club members the other day. I said, you know, we stopped them, we scored, we stopped them, we scored. We're coming back. That next series, the first two passes get batted down by William Gaines. And it's 3rd and 10, and I'm in the student section, 19 rows up on the 10-yard line. And literally, it is so loud, I can't even feel myself talking in my chest. You know, usually, even when it's loud, you feel the vibrations in your chest. I could feel nothing. It was complete insanity. It went from being the loudest play and everybody going, yes, 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 to, you know, the pass to Dunn. And you could literally hear the tenor in the stadium change from yes to no, what? And I will go to my grave saying Anthony Lott was clipped. That play should never have gone. And because I can remember at 3rd and 10 before the snap, I looked up at the scoreboard and thought to myself, I'm going to be able to tell my kids and grandkids that I was at the greatest comeback in the history of Florida football, knocking off the top-ranked Seminoles, the Heisman Trophy winning quarterback, and alas, it wasn't meant to be. But that was it. For me, the loudest game start to finish was homecoming last year with Auburn. It was being in that stadium. Now, admittedly, I spent 20 years in Pennsylvania, so I didn't get to as many games for a significant period of time. But even those 90s games with Spurrier and Warfel and all of that talent, that game it was, I think, the first time in a long time that you had a matchup that big at home. It was on homecoming. Mullen called the fans out, which I thought was a brilliant play call before the game. He said, we need you to pack it. You need to have your butts in those seats 30 minutes early, and we need you loud from start to finish. And it was. And then I go back and watch, there's a great YouTube clip of the LaMichael Pirine touchdown where he takes a snap, he breaks off James Britt's tackle, and there's a little bit of a roar. And then when he gets by that last defender in the sidelines, it just goes to a whole other level. And that was exemplary of that whole game, but it was just a phenomenal experience. And it'd been a long time since I'd been in an STC caliber game of that level. Most of the games that I went to were the games I were guaranteed we were going to win. You know, like I don't want to go and spend all that money and, you know, lose. So I was going to like Charleston Southern and those kinds of games. But Auburn last year was just phenomenal. All right. So favorite play for you in Gator football history? Individual play, not necessarily the loudest you've heard, but what was your favorite play?
If one immediately doesn't come to mind, I suppose I don't have to work through one. What's your?
I mean, yeah, this is recency bias probably. These aren't even big wins necessarily, stuff I'm running through, but this is not a very good Gator team versus not a very good Tennessee team. But the Will Greer throw to Callaway on 4th down, that was a really fun moment. Again, it ended up not meaning a lot, but I just had so much fun celebrating that win because I just enjoyed us beating Tennessee over and over again. That was a really fun moment. There's lots of others that come to mind, but maybe that, again, it could be just recency bias, but that was a really fun moment.
I tend to remember more of like the heartbreaking plays.
Yes.
Like I remember being in the swamp the September 11th postponed Tennessee game and having them beat
Oh,
us. I just remember that stuff. I was also there in Tennessee when Jabbar Gaffney caught the ball for like 0.25 seconds and we won. That was also really fun. Any of Percy Harvin's big runs were sensational. Earl Everett with his helmet off in the national championship game that I was at, tackling, what's his face for Ohio State was
Troy Smith,
was amazing and sensational. And you know what's funny is the first play that truly came to mind, and I think this is in large part because of the podcast, the Will Grier pass to Brandon Powell against Ole Miss. When we came into that game, we were sort of rising. And he hits that pass right over the middle, winds up being a touchdown, kind of similar to the Kadarius Toney touchdown this year. The swamp just was nuts. It was like, this is it. We're good again. We're here. That was like a Shakespearean moment. It's like the highs were so high, and then little did I know the lows would be so low just after that. But that was a big moment. I felt like we put ourselves out there on the pond. I was stoking for Will Grier. Nobody else was. He was bawling. The crowd was eating it up. We were back. And then, we weren't. But yeah, there's probably too many to mention, and I really don't think I have a singular moment. Which that's a good question. I probably need to get one if I'm going to host a Gator podcast and have an on-demand answer there. And I don't have.
Yeah, well, and truth be told, when I asked this question, I said, okay, I'm not going to hang these guys out on a limb like this. I had to give it some thought, and it took me a while and I really don't know that I have one that's like so definitively out front that it's the clear choice. But for me, I was saying to Tom earlier before we got started, the Ike Hilliard touchdown in the '96 national championship game where he just stops on a dime. The two Florida State defenders come past him and kind of run into each other, and we go in for a score. I was like, that's the epitome of how much better I think we really were than that Florida State team, despite having lost in Tallahassee at the end of the regular season. When you're playing Florida State plus the officials plus Mickey Andrews and the late hits and all that stuff, I'm a little biased clearly, but for me that was the one play I was like, that is just awesome, incredible stuff. So last question I have, and then we're kind of up against time. I don't want to run you guys any longer than we promised. What is your favorite Gators team in any sport? So like a sport and a year. What's the one that you just that put it over the top for you guys?
Well, I do think we mentioned this that 06-07 Gator basketball team. Following them very closely and seeing from the beginning that they had something maybe a little special, but not ever believing they were going to win the championship. And I think I had become such a passionate Gator basketball fan and had my heart broken so many times. To see them actually pull it out was like just such a tremendous. I think I enjoyed that more than either of the two football championships. So at that time, so that was a sky high moment, for sure.
Yeah, I agree. That team, and for that reason, like Florida football, I came into school as a freshman expecting to compete for a title, but basketball was on the rise. It was up and coming, it was new. And to win that title that year where no one really was projecting us to win it, like Alan said, to watch those guys was immensely satisfying. And that was truly, growing up a basketball fan, that's one of the best, I think the best college basketball team ever, with the way they played the game. If you look at their margin of victory, especially in the tournaments themselves, they just played the game in such an incredibly great way. It was a joy to watch, and obviously what a fun team to support. And switching gears for a second, there's been a question in the chat that I feel like we should answer. It's very simple, but it asks about Evan McPherson. Is Evan McPherson the real deal? And the answer is definitely yes. In fact, Caleb Sturgis is a good friend of ours, and obviously NFL kicker, Gator kicker, still trains a lot of NFL kickers. And in his opinion, Evan McPherson is the best kicker he's ever seen. He thinks he's on the Justin Tucker level. And Justin Tucker is the greatest kicker of all time. It's not even really a question about that. And he thinks he's on that level. To give you Caleb Sturgis' own words, he's like, when Evan McPherson misses the ball, it still goes in. Basically, the variance of his kick is so small. He strikes it so clean that Caleb thinks he's the best kicker he's ever seen. And that's machine. Yeah, he's a machine. He's like a robot, and that's incredible. Again, that comes from a guy, Caleb, who's not effusive with his praise for most people. He's kind of a very laid back, quiet guy. But obviously the results dictated too. I mean, he's unreal. I mean, he's certainly going to be kicking the NFL for a very long time.
Yeah, I would agree, and that's not something Florida football teams have always been able to rely on a reliable kicker. It was kind of interesting watching that sequence in the A&M game when they get the delay of game and then the false start, and he was just like, man, whatever, like 10 more yards, and then he made it. Was it 53 yards? I think was ultimately what he ended up kicking from, and it would have been good from 60 to 65. I mean, it wasn't even close to hitting the crossbar. It's almost, I guess, it's like kind of like, to draw a golf analogy, the ball striking is just remarkable.
Yeah, it's great. It's absolutely incredible.
And that's such a weapon. I think it's an underappreciated weapon on a football team. When you have that, you're like, okay, if you give up, plus yardage, if you let them on your side of the field, you're more than likely going to give up at least 3 points. That's a huge advantage for a team. It's remarkable. I'm certainly proud to have him kicking field goals for us. So, one last question from Catherine Coleman, our club president. Since she's a president, I will give her the bully pulpit and squeeze one more in. She's asking about Jacob Finn replacing, kind of the legacy punters in the Townsend brothers, but walk on seems to be doing fairly well. I guess not a lot of punts for him to have made, but seems to be holding his own in a very highly competitive environment.
Yeah, it's fine. I guess he's had 3 punts. I think 2 have looked really solid. We have one little bit of a mishit that still ended up going, in our favor. We'll see. I mean, I don't think he's like been crushing. He's not like a Tommy Townsend flipping the field, but I think in a complete unknown walk-on, you would certainly take what he's given you so far. I mean, he's done exactly what we've asked him to.
Yeah, he's been a surprise. Obviously, we pulled in a Australian rules guy who people were high on, thought he'd win the job. Winds up being Finn. And again, I can only give you Caleb Sturgis' insight, which is great insight because he works with these guys pretty routinely. But he had said that Finn's progression was like remarkable, how much better he is now. And clearly he won that job. I think for a Florida fan, my first question was, well, wait a minute, like, guy we recruit just fall apart? No, it doesn't seem that way. And if you watch Finn strike the ball, while I was at A&M and you're watching the specialists come out and kick early, I mean, he can hammer it. He's sending some of those balls big time. But doing it, 5 minutes before the half and then doing it in the game is different. So we'll see what happens when he's got some more pressure on him. Obviously, the one real pressure pick he had against A&M, he missed it. That's okay. Small sample size, but certainly a nice story from him for a guy who's worked really hard to get to where he is, and hopefully we won't have to have him punt too many times this season. But when he does, hopefully they'll make a big difference.
Well, gentlemen, I want to thank you very much for sharing an hour with us here at the Daytona Beach Gator Club. We've passionate fans all over the country. The Gator Nation is truly everywhere. I love walking, go to a conference out of town somewhere, wear a Gator shirt. Doesn't matter where you are, Midwest, Northeast, wherever, and people are like, "Hey, go Gators!" And that's just such a cool thing, and to be so proud of a university, I think it's just remarkable. Appreciate the time you shared with us tonight. The fantastic work on the podcast. Wish you continued success. I hope that you will see an increase in donos to make that part of the broadcast a little longer for you guys as a result of your efforts here tonight. And I think James, was it you that mentioned that you and Caleb are that your pickleball partners and planning to take over the pickleball world? Did I hear that correctly?
That's our plan, and we know that where you live is Daytona, and we call it Mecca with what else you have there. So I played down there in Daytona. You got a great setup down there.
Nice. Well, listen. Now that we're acquainted with each other, the next time you make that journey down, reach out. We'll grab lunch or dinner or what have you, and we'll gather the Gator Club, and it won't be like work. We'll just have a good time talking about Gator sports, and we'll take you to our home away from home with the Daytona Beach Gator Club, the Hooligans. They will be the best wings that you've had, but they've got a fantastic menu of a bunch of other stuff as well. So, guys, thanks again. Continued success with the podcast, and look forward to listening in the coming weeks and months ahead.
Thanks, Ken.
Thanks for having us. It was great. We appreciate it.
All right, very good. Well, ladies and gentlemen, virtual round of applause for James DiVirgilio and Alan Williams, hosts of the Gator Nation Football Podcast. If you have not been listening, shame on you. If I've told you about it and you haven't listened yet, shame on you. And I will publicly shame you until their listenership grows tremendously. So, fantastic evening. We're going to be doing some more of this with the Daytona Beach Gator Club. This is our dipping our toe into the virtual pool for gatherings. And until we can get together and have our great speakers, I think this presents some pretty interesting opportunities, and we definitely hope to have these guys down in person one time so they can get the full-on Gator Club experience. With that, we'll sign off for the night. Hope you have a great evening, and go Gators. We'll see you, everybody. Thanks for tuning in. Take care.